Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Well, today we have another A Neighbor's Choice episode for you. And this is a topic that we continue to cover. I don't see hardly anybody talking about it the way it should be covered. And that is what's going on in Armenia with Azerbaijan and Artsakh, this area that has continued to be a place for tremendous suffering and just a repulsive participation of the United States in what appears to be some type of ethnic cleansing situation. And to give us an update on the matter since we last spoke with them, we have a returning guest, Dennis Marburger. How you doing, sir?
David, I'm doing well, and it's good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, very good. And now you are Armenian, is that right?
On my mother's side of the family, yes.
Yeah. So how do you feel as an Armenian watching what's going on right now? Give us and give us an update on the situation.
Okay, well, um, having an Armenian ethnicity does have an impact on how one would view this, of course, because it makes it more personal. And then also just being somebody that follows what's happening, keeps up with events, and like you is a believer in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and like you, I believe very strongly in personal liberty and peace and people treating each other the right way, you know, the golden rule and that sort of thing. This is a heartbreaking situation, and there's an aspect of it that's infuriating that I think you referenced, which is United States enabling of it, and the enabling done by other countries for the genocidal ethnic cleansing terror state of Azerbaijan, which is ruled over by the dictator, war criminal, and state terrorist Ilham Aliyev. And so what just recently happened is that on September 19th, following this 10-month starvation blockade that we talked about previously, the humanitarian blockade that had the people there starving and in very desperate straits, Azerbaijan actually went to a full-scale military operation, launching apparently artillery and mortar and drone warfare, and then sending infantry into this territory. And they overwhelmed the Artsakh Defense Army, which was massively outnumbered, but fought bravely. And apparently there were a number of situations where the soldiers there knew the consequences, and they fought to the last man. And then the last man was also killed, apparently. And it became evident relatively quickly, within a day or day and a half, that this Azerbaijan was just going to overwhelm everything. So the government there, which had just recently had a parliamentary election, that government then said, well, we surrender. They called for a cessation of hostilities. One of the first things the Azerbaijanis had done, David, was apparently to attack some communications links to make it difficult to get information out from some areas that they also isolated. But there were still some very brave journalists who were still there. Siranush Sargsyan, Marut Vanyan, and I think there were some others, but those are the first two that come to mind. And they were doing some reporting, but it was very difficult. And there were videos that came out from the Azerbaijani side, apparently, much less so than they've done previously. There appears to have been an effort to keep the world blind as to what was going on in some of these places. But there was a video that showed up on Telegram that showed Azerbaijani terror soldiers with serrated knives, the purpose of which was to behead, but not like chop off a head with an axe, but to saw off somebody's head, which they've done previously. There were also things on Telegram, by the way, where worried parents were looking for their children, and Azerbaijanis on certain Telegram channels were saying horrific things about what they'd like to do to these people or to their children. They were talking about auctioning off women and or children for sexual purposes and other terrible things. Then some of those channels went private because the Azerbaijani government was apparently worried about this getting out. But what eventually happened was there was just a large, I guess we'd call it an exodus. That's what it was. But it was forced. The Azerbaijanis said, "Oh, we didn't force anybody out. If you look at everything they've been doing and what's happened to people that have stayed behind and the way they were conducting this campaign, no sane person who had the ability to get out and didn't have some sort of a humanitarian reason to stay behind. Apparently some women stayed behind to take care of animals and there's a lot of them that I guess they need help too. But essentially 120,000 people, minus a very, very tiny number, got on this corridor, this Lachin corridor, which then Azerbaijan did open that up, which people had talked about. They said they shut it down to starve the people, but they'd open it up if people wanted to leave. And so they accomplished their ethnic cleansing goal, so that essentially the entire Armenian population of what was left, what was then the surviving unoccupied remnant of Artsakh, all left, went to Armenia in a very arduous journey. Some people died. In fact, and before this thing, at the very early stages of it, there was an explosion at a gasoline facility, and there's some questions about just how and why this happened. But people died. I mean, it was several hundred people were injured, and because of the Azerbaijani blockade that had gone on previously, the local medical facilities, they didn't have it, anywhere near what they would need to take care of people, as was also the case for any military casualties that were there. And so some folks were airlifted out. But essentially what happened was that this group of over 100,000 people, about roughly 120,000 people, got on the road on this corridor, which was a trip that would normally take a couple hours. Apparently it took 2 days or a little bit more than 2 days for many people. And some people died along the way getting out. And so now this population has shifted to the Republic of Armenia. And as you can imagine, there's a large humanitarian need there, added to the other humanitarian needs they have in that country, and to find proper housing and food and clothing for all these people, because you couldn't take your things, your furniture. You basically went with the clothes on your back, and maybe I think people were grabbing a suitcase or two and throwing some clothes in there and papers, that sort of thing, and whatever they could quickly get, and then take off. And now that they're all gone, videos have come out of Azerbaijani soldiers in these homes, ransacking them, laughing, carrying on, having a good time. Lindsay Snell, as the journalist had said, they have some creepy and bizarre fascination with women's underwear when they go through these people's homes. And so it's really a horrific thing. People were even taking down pictures of martyrs, Armenian martyrs who had defended Artsakh. There was a thing they had in the middle of Stepanakert, and they took their pictures so they wouldn't be defaced or vandalized by the Azerbaijanis. And so the folks are out of there now, and Azerbaijan is, as we knew they would be, is talking. Their government is talking about further aggression. Ilham Aliyev, I think, yesterday and today is actually in Stepanakert. He went into Artsakh.
Who's that?
Aliyev went into this territory.
Who is this? Who?
Ilham Aliyev, the dictator of Azerbaijan.
Okay.
So he's going around raising the terrorist Azerbaijani flag over these towns and renaming them. And he was in Stepanakert walking through the government buildings there. And they say, oh, he's meeting with the residents, or there are no residents there to greet him. And he's going into offices and things. And another thing that has happened, David, is that the leadership, including the people who are, elected, as well as military leadership, and including a gentleman named Ruben Vardanyan, who's a wealthy businessman and philanthropist who supports a lot of causes and was one of the financiers of restoring a mosque in Shushi while it was under before the Azerbaijanis took it over. He actually had led the move to restore this mosque. But he and several other leaders were illegally abducted by the Azerbaijanis, and apparently looks like they may have been in an area that was under control of Russian peacekeepers who just turned them over, didn't do anything about it, and the Azerbaijanis now have them in custody in Baku. They're undoubtedly mistreating them. That's what they do to everybody that they have in captivity. And they put forward these propaganda videos of these gentlemen being arrested, then they take them to their cells, and one of the guards puts his arm across the back of the neck, sort of bend their head down, even though it's not like you need to do it to get them into a police car or something. They just did that. And Aliyev had made a comment that these people would bend their necks to him. And so he's having his terrorist guards do this. It's a very sad situation. And, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of, as you referenced earlier, this gets very little coverage. A few people talk about it, but not many. And so this is getting very little coverage, that these people are now in prison, and he's
how many people are in prison?
I'm sorry?
How many people are in prison?
I believe it's 8 leaders so far that they've captured, they've put in prison from Artsakh, and then they've got a bunch of soldiers from the previous 44-day terror war of aggression in 2020 that they have in prison, that they haven't released, and then there's dozens of them that they still have, along with a few other people that they've had kidnapped more recently, where they would just go across the border and grab somebody. And one person in particular, Vagiv, I think his name was Vagiv Kachaturian, he was under the protection of the International Committee for the Red Cross, and he was going to go to Yerevan for help for his heart condition. And they had a name on a list that was either his name, but it was a different person, or a name similar to his. So they abducted him, and they just started a show trial for this person, who somebody pointed out, he looks like he's lost a lot of weight, so he's probably malnourished now. Though I don't think they were being that well nourished before this. But on top of that, they're making these accusations against him, which, again, as we talked about in the last time you and I chatted, really were about somebody else. They were probably false allegations about the other person, but they appear to certainly be true for this fellow. But he's in a show trial and a sham. Nobody there to defend him. There is some attorney they've assigned to him, but this is a kangaroo court in all aspects. So there are quite a few people now that are in the injustice system of Azerbaijan. The Armenian population of Artsakh has been totally cleared out, except for a very, very few people. And Aliyev is getting ready to launch further aggression against Armenia. He keeps threatening it. And they talk about this corridor that he wants to establish across the country to go to an area called Nakhichevan. He talks about taking Yerevan, and really the whole country is under threat. The 24/7 Armenophobic lies and hate mongering continue. And it's clear that his goal and that of Erdogan is eventually the complete elimination of the Armenian presence in the ancient Armenian homeland and heartland. And they've accomplished together getting rid of the bulk of it, but there's still some left. And their intention is to finish with the remnants of the sword, as Erdogan called the survivors of the genocide and the descendants of the survivors of the genocide. That's where we are now. And of course, it's even further complicated with the situation between Israel and the Palestinians. But even through all this, apparently, Israeli weapons, it looks like they're still being flown to Azerbaijan to continue arming the Azerbaijanis. The United States continues sending weapons to Israel, some say to replenish the stocks that are drawn lower as they send weapons to Azerbaijan. And
wait, Israel sends weapons to Azerbaijan?
Oh, yes, quite a bit. In
Why?
fact, evidently, they are the largest weapons supplier to Azerbaijan.
What are they sending?
Well, they send drones. I think they have other weapons there as well. Some vehicles and some other things that they use. But apparently, roughly 60% or 61% of the weaponry that Azerbaijan was purchasing has been coming from the state of Israel, and just recently, during this year. it was noted, including by some Israeli observers, that there were very large, heavy lifter cargo planes flying between Baku and an airfield or airbase, a restricted one in Israel. And these Azerbaijani planes were landing Silkways aircraft, Silkways Airlines, and then they were flying over to Azerbaijan, loaded with sophisticated Israeli weaponry. And there are some Israelis who have commented about it, complained about it, and said we should stop doing this. But it hasn't stopped, even now. This is still going on. So
what's Azerbaijan's position on the Palestinian and Israel conflict?
That's an interesting question. They have the most recent things I've seen, and they've done this before. They really play up a relationship with the state of Israel, partly for, I think, political reasons, geopolitical reasons, and partly because Azerbaijan sells Israel a lot of oil, apparently, and then Israel sells Azerbaijan a lot of weapons. And so there's been some official communication saying that Azerbaijan has to stand with Israel. There have been some Azerbaijanis who apparently some didn't like that, but that's the official position. And I think that they make sure that everybody moves together in the same direction. As we talked about before, it's a very authoritarian and regimented society.
Are they Sunni or Shia Muslims predominantly in Azerbaijan?
I believe they're predominantly Shia Muslims, whereas the Turks, who they say are their brother country, they say, two states, one people kind of thing. The Turks are majority Sunni. The Iranis, of course, are majority Shia, but Iran and Azerbaijan have been at odds diplomatically and in some communication things, particularly on social media. There's thought that the Israelis sometimes will attack Iran, with sabotage or terrorist attacks or something, or do things to disrupt Iranian activities and to monitor Iran from Azerbaijan. And the United States apparently has monitoring stations there too. The NSA has a bunch of things there too. But Turkey, interestingly, though for a long time, Turkey and Israel were close. And then Erdogan took a little bit different stance on this. In fact, you may remember at one time there was that flotilla that was trying to take things to break the blockade, the siege of Gaza sort of thing. Yeah. And they're right. And on at least one, maybe more than one, but one of the ships that these Israeli military personnel descended on, I guess either paratroopers or guys out of helicopters or something, had some Turkish people in there. In fact, there was an American of Turkish ethnicity, a young man that was killed, and that was a little bit of a controversy there. And so Erdogan actually has taken some different views of this. In fact, he's commented. He said, "Oh, Jerusalem is a Turkish city." So he's again, this idea of the Neo-Ottoman Caliphate or the Neo-Ottoman Empire. Erdogan is looking at reestablishing that, and Aliyev is with him on this, except on the Israeli-Palestinian question. Aliyev, in his regime, tends to lean more towards Israel, whereas Turkey, in the past, for a long time, was more pro-Israeli, and they thought they could work together and to each other's benefit. They've taken a different view over the last number of years, and sometimes Erdogan shifts back and forth, like politicians and national leaders will do on these different things. But there does seem to be a little bit of a difference there. And then there's another aspect of their genocidal axis of evil that they have there with Turkey and Azerbaijan. That's Pakistan. And I guess the Pakistanis are sort of scratching their heads over this now too, because I think they tend not to be pro-Israel, but they see Azerbaijan leaning that way. So now some people are wondering what's going on there between them.
Pakistan is a government that we have done a lot to arm as well and send a lot of money and weapons to them.
Right. And in fact, that's right. So this also goes back during the Cold War with the idea that radical Islam might be a tool that the U.S. government could use. I say radical Islam, I guess militant. Others say, well, maybe militant Islamists thought the U.S. government was a tool they could use. But anyway, you're right. So with the Pakistanis and the Saudis and with the Turks, that was all going on back there during the Cold War with the madrasas and everything. So this might have been a thing that all came together. But for the Armenians, it's a bad situation. Pashinyan's government was doing this pivot to be less, I guess you would say, less friendly with or less allied with Russia. And even maybe less allied with Iran, though. You look at the map and you say, well, if you got Turkey on the one side and Azerbaijan on the other, they're both talking about what they're talking about and finishing the genocide and all that sort of thing. You got to have some friends in the neighborhood, and so you would think that would make sense for them to do what they can to at least be on decent terms with Iran and Russia. I think with Iran, they have a better relationship than they do with Russia right now. And
Who's
of course,
that? Armenia? You're talking about?
Armenia, yes,
Yeah.
right. So Iran and Armenia have a border, and the Iranians have been clear they do not want to see the Turks and the Azerbaijanis going in and taking over the southern part of Armenia and closing that off.
Why?
They definitely. Well, they see Turkey and Azerbaijan as potential. They've in the past had enmity. In fact, the state of Azerbaijan, the Persian government back in the day when they first tried to get it going, that was never recognized internationally. This is in the immediate post-World War II period. The Persian and Iranian government said, "Hey, you can't use that name, Azerbaijan. That's the name of a area here in this country." And the land, I think, had been Persian, and between the British and the Turks and the Soviets, they set up this new country, and went through a lot of falsifications, including using that name Azerbaijan. But I think the Iranians do not want to see Turkey and Azerbaijan get rid of Armenia. I think they might have some sympathy or empathy for the Armenians having suffered so much as martyrs and that sort of thing. But also they want to have that pathway north, independent of those other two countries, and so they see that as a threat to them, particularly when they see Azerbaijan working closely with Israeli military. That would raise a lot of red flags for the Iranians. So
let's review for my fellow Americans tonight. What percentage of Armenia is Christian?
Essentially the whole country, and it was the first Christian nation, the first nation to actually adopt Christianity.
What year was that?
301 AD, St. Gregory the Illuminator.
Okay. Now, I thought that the United States government was clear that Iran intends to establish an Islamic caliphate in the region. Why would they be protecting Christian Armenia from Muslim Azerbaijan?
Gee, Dave, you ask these penetrating questions that make one say.
I try to ask questions like Forrest Gump. Those are the best when dealing with American foreign policy. How would Forrest Gump ask questions about American foreign policy? It's usually the best way to go,
Okay, well, you're probably right. So the American foreign policy, some people say, we get the party of evil and the party of stupid working together, and so you got some of both of those. And of course, you've probably seen this. A number of people have pointed this out, that Iran hasn't invaded another country in hundreds of years. So
wait, didn't they just do Hamas? Weren't they? I don't want to go down this, but didn't they just do the Hamas thing? Weren't they?
Well, there's that allegation. It was interesting. Are they pro or anti-Hamas? They will say that they are definitely see the Palestinian cause as one of their causes. We know that ISIS is opposed, and Iran are at loggerheads, and the allegation that Iran and Hamas, like Iran, was behind this latest terrorist attack, that horrible thing that happened at the music festival and these other things.
Yeah.
So people were making the allegation, and then it came out that Iran said, no, we weren't. And I believe the United States government said, no, we don't think they were either. I think even the Israeli sources were saying, no, it doesn't look like they were. Now, is there work between Iran and Hamas on some things? That there might be. We do know that Iran, for instance, has been not Hamas. I mean, Hamas has fought against the government in Syria and the people of Syria that want to have a pluralistic society. And Iran has been helping that government against the ISIS jihadists.
Wait a second. So the ISIS now, they're Sunnis, right?
Right.
Iranians are Shiites, so that would be enmity a little bit there, maybe. But you're saying that Iran, which the United States government has told us wants to establish, I guess it depends on which faction, but a lot of the United States government's factions have been telling us they want to establish an Islamic caliphate in the region. They want to have an Islamic empire, but they're backing the pluralist government in Syria against the Islamic ISIS in Syria. Is that right?
This is correct, Dave. Yeah, okay. You're right. And by the way,
so they're and the same Iranian government that wants to create an Islamic empire in the Middle East, according to the United States government, has backed the Christian Armenian government and people against the fellow Shiite Azerbaijanis. Is that right?
Well, they have done that regarding the threats of Azerbaijan to take over southern Armenia, to try to force a corridor through. There is, this is an interesting question. After the 44-day terror war of aggression by Azerbaijan against the Armenians and against Artsakh, Iran said, "Oh, well, Azerbaijan was liberating their own territory." Of course, I would say that that's not correct, but there are Iranians who have, and with a number of these situations, some Iranian spokespeople, I think, have said things have been, you say, well, that sounds like really pro-Armenian. Others would say, well, yeah, but then they were congratulating them on their victory in 2020. Now, to what degree was that them saying, well, I guess, Aliyev won, and so we'll say, trying to save face or something like that. Some people thought that they favored the Armenians back in the 90s, that they may have done that. But they certainly have warned, and I mean they've had some pretty interesting videos saying that, if you go and attack Armenia, try to change this situation in our border, we're going to strike back at you. And so that, in that sense, it would seem like there was something along those lines. And as we were talking about earlier, yes, Iran has been a very important ally for the Syrian people, including the Syrian Christians, in resisting ISIS, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, all those groups who have support from Turkey and from Saudi Arabia, though I think the Saudis now might be standing down on that sort of thing. And of course, Syria's been bombed incessantly by Israel, even as they get earthquake relief supplies. That a lot of Americans, and our family, our church, doing this, and many Americans are doing this, sending earthquake relief supplies. But the airports in Damascus and Aleppo have been bombed repeatedly by Israel. And then Turkey is going wild, attacking the Kurds in Syria. And the United States still occupies a large area of Syria that has oil and wheat and that sort of thing, and has very damaging sanctions on Syria, so the people can't rebuild. But here are the Iranians helping, yes, the pluralistic side of Syria, President Assad and the Christians and the Alawites, even though the Syrian, I believe the majority of Syrians are Sunni, and I think the Alawites, which is the group that the Assad family comes from, I believe they are also Syrians, but they're Baathists. And of course, the Baathists said, well, we don't really care what your religion is or thing, but let's just all work together from a national perspective. So yes, it is, the situation there is different. I know this is shocking, David, but the situation is different than what we frequently hear from American politicians, bureaucrats, and mass media.
So who is the biggest weapons supplier for Azerbaijan as they, remove these Armenians and arrest these Armenians?
Well, it's been, I mean, Israel has been the largest. Now, they also get supplies from Russia. Russia was an arms supplier to both Armenia and Azerbaijan. And by the way, somebody said, I read this one, I can't confirm this, but there was talk back regarding some of the drone weaponry and some of the things that the Israelis had. And one person said, well, there are Israeli officials that'll say, yeah, we offered to sell them to Armenia too, but they didn't take us up on the offer. So have the Iranians. I think I've heard the Iranians say, we got some good drone technology and anti-drone warfare things if you need some help and and that sort of thing. But it's not clear that the Armenian government has took them up on that, or if they have, I haven't seen reports on that. But so as I said, Israel apparently was the number one arms supplier. I don't know if the most recent figures have come out or whatever, but the ones that had come out previously definitely suggested that. And then they get weaponry from with Turkey and Russia, and there's, I think, American. We talked about this before. There is American support for this. Probably, I think, some American weaponry too, and the nominee, I don't know if he's been confirmed yet, but I think the president's nominee for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I believe, is a General Brown in the Air Force. He's been over there with other American military personnel and with NATO, and they've been coordinating and planning and sharing ideas and, I guess, secrets, and then thoughts about how to be a more powerful military. And Azerbaijani military have come to this country to be trained, and from Oklahoma. And so our friends from Oklahoma who might listen to this and who are involved in the Defend the Guard movement and other things, I might find this interesting, but the governor seems to have a warm relationship with Azerbaijan. Something that I would think most Oklahomans, that they knew about this and knew the nature of the Azerbaijani government, they wouldn't want that. But there have been apparently Oklahoma National Guard and Azerbaijani military working together. I think sometimes actually in Oklahoma. So it's a bad situation all around.
What are they doing in Oklahoma?
I guess they're working on with flying helicopters and learning how to operate different equipment, and I think some of that might be going on overseas as well. But there's been quite a that relationship has been going on for a number of years now, and a few people have pointed it out. But
how did that come about? Why not Nebraska or Wyoming?
Yeah, I guess I don't have the answer to that question. That's a good one, and I think for the good people of Oklahoma to investigate that and say, well, how was that the governor of that fine state got involved with this with the dictator of Azerbaijan, and maybe that's something that they might want to change.
So I'm still trying to understand. You're saying the United States is not the number one weapons supplier for Armenia? Azerbaijan? No,
I don't believe that we are. Our government is, or the military companies here are the armaments companies. The statistics indicated it would be Israeli weaponry would be the number one. Now, the United States has done this thing where presidents have waived Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act. And the Freedom Support Act has been, I think, waived every year since 2001 at the suggestion first of Ambassador Sam Brownback, who he's from Kansas. He was a governor and senator. He has changed his position on this, but the idea was they didn't want to be subsidizing Azerbaijani military activity against Armenia and or others, but particularly against Armenia and Artsakh. But this has been waived now for the 20 years plus. Apparently, the waiver has not occurred yet. There are a number of politicians in Washington that have been approached, and the president hasn't signed the waiver yet. Maybe he will do it. Nobody's looking at everything, so nobody's paying attention to this thing. But that by waiving that Section 907, by not enforcing that legislation, quite a bit of money has gone over there. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have gone over to Azerbaijan, which also is transporting Russian gas that might otherwise have gone through the Nord Stream pipeline, but they put it through that BTC pipeline that they have, and then Aliyev gets a financial remuneration from that.
So didn't Joseph Biden recently say something positive about the Armenians?
Oh yeah, yeah, he may have. I tell you, one thing he did recently was he said, "Okay, we officially recognize that the Armenians were the subject of genocide by Turkey in it was really 1895 through 1923, and I don't know if he specified that time frame, but so he did that. Oh, that's nice." And then he turned right around and he waived the Section 907 again, and it's clear when you look at what he has said and done, and Secretary of State Blinken. And they'll try both sides and things. Well, would you folks please just sit down and chat? We went there to be less hostile and have peace. But the problem here is that they're helping to arm and enable a genocidal dictatorship.
Why don't they arm the Armenian side too? I mean, they like to do that in a lot of conflicts, right? So why don't they do that? And why doesn't Israel arm both sides? You said that, like you said, Israel said we tried to sell some weapons to Armenia, but they didn't buy them.
Right. Well, that's an interesting question. There is work now that's going on. They said we're going to have some military training with American personnel here in Armenia. That just happened a few weeks ago. Actually, just before the September, so it was earlier than September 19th. I know that. And then some video came out. People pointed out, well, it's not really training the Armenian military. It's like they're training domestic police in riot control or something. And then this other thing happened. He said, so this is great. So now, they said that sarcastically. So the American government has done a lot saying, oh, well, we want you to have, they try to push some of the popular agendas from the political elite in this country, get the Armenian government to push that. They were sort of supporting the Armenian domestic national police and that sort of thing, sort of to protect the regime, the Pashinyan regime. But it wasn't clear that they were really doing much to help the Armenian military for defense against Azerbaijani aggression. And I think there has in the past been some military support, and I do see situations where Armenian and American military personnel will interact, and so I think there's some support along those lines. But the tilting seems to have definitely been in favor of Azerbaijan, and I don't really see a change in that, though. There are some American, I think, politicians and bureaucrats who say, well, if the more they could do to pull any country away from being friendly with Russia, they like that idea, and so they're so I think that they're pushing that as a thing, and it's possible that because we have a lot of there's been pressure brought in Washington politically. We have a number of high-profile American office holders who are raising these points. Now, interestingly, I should mention this. The acting assistant secretary of state, her name is Yuri Kim, was testifying before a Senate committee. And she said that the United States would not tolerate any further Azerbaijani aggression. If they were to make a move against the Armenians or against Artsakh and Gorno-Karabakh, America wouldn't tolerate that. She said that 5 days before they did this thing. And then they were talking about different things and why they had the blockade on there. And she was asked this question: well, why is it that Azerbaijan is doing this blockade? What's the whole purpose of it, and what are they up to over there? And she said in response to that question that she didn't want to answer it in public discourse. She wanted to talk about it behind closed doors, and people, why would that be a secret? Why can't you tell us what you think is really going on here? But she refused to say anything about it. And then it was like I believe it was like 5 days later, they launched this attack. And after that was over, she and Samantha Power, who's infamous, she's the head of the United States Agency for International Development. And Samantha Power would not talk about genocide going on. She would not even say ethnic cleansing, even when they were on the ground in Armenia after this horrific assault that Azerbaijan unleashed on September 19th. They still wouldn't even say that ethnic cleansing had occurred. And so it's really a shameful thing. And there's aid that could be dispensed to the people, but they had never done that. They had never taken steps to break the blockade. Now, one might look at that as I think I would, and as you would say, well, we don't want the United States to be interventionist. We don't want America to get involved here, but say, well, could we at least have somebody call this out and call it what it is that's going on there? Could we at least have the United States stop subsidizing this? Could we at least have the United States and NATO stop working with this Azerbaijani dictatorship to accomplish all these goals? And if you look at the entire purview of U.S. foreign policy and the interventionism all over the world, this empire of bases and how they're trying to encircle China and Russia at the same time, which seems crazy in its own right. But by pushing up against them like this, it's made the situation for Armenia, and I think for maybe some other situations, more dangerous, because then you get, someone like President Putin in Russia, who at least tries to think logically. I think about what he sees as the best thing for Russia. And then he sees the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline blown up, and he says, well, we want to sell our gas somewhere. So he's working with Aliyev, and Aliyev and Erdogan will give them ways to evade the U.S. sanctions while they're doing these things. And you see that, and then you see the ISIS fighters, and somebody was pointing out, it seems like whenever there's ISIS or somebody in Syria and some of these other groups, they're either very close to where the United States has military or in areas controlled by the Turks, and the Turks are going through there and blasting away at these Kurds, including people who have fought against ISIS. So the whole thing just makes you shake your head and you say, whoa, how is this possibly really a good thing for the American people? And how is it a good thing for the people that just want to be left alone and not overrun by head chopping jihadists and totalitarian authoritarian regimes and things of that nature?
Yeah, I don't understand, because I thought that, a lot of the American conservative neocons have been telling us that we have to, do whatever to annihilate, Gaza or whatever, all of Hamas, everybody, all of Gaza, because that is the responsible thing to do to stop, global radical Islamic terrorism. But why is Israel funding Azerbaijan as they are doing an ethnic cleansing on Christian Armenians?
Was a great question, and of course, you're asking as we're talking about that other situation, and people have pointed out. I mean, Scott Horton and others have looked at this, and Glenn Greenwald and other folks have been going back and bringing out the receipts, going back into the memory bank and saying, well, here's what was going on with the establishment of Hamas and the policy maybe of the United States government, perhaps of the Israeli government, and even fairly recently, Netanyahu saying things like, well, if we don't want there to be a two-state solution, if we don't want the Palestinians to have their own separate state, if Hamas is in charge, then they're certainly hostile to us. And there was, a combination, maybe looking the other way or providing in some way some indirect support for this, or saying, hey, we see that some people thought it might be positive for Israeli and or American foreign policy to have Hamas be successful. And the idea was that Hamas was had this religious, if you will, component, very violently and exclusionist Islamic ideology, as opposed to the PLO and Fatah, which was more secular. So you said, well, why would we want to be supporting that? And well, the answer is we probably wouldn't. But apparently some people thought it was a clever way to disable the Palestinian drive for independence or Palestinian statehood, and that's come back around to cause problems. Just like some people say, well, if you really look at what happened with Al Qaeda and ISIS and that sort of thing, people say, well, wait a minute, just exactly what are the relationships here? And we remember Jake Sullivan saying, well, in Syria, ISIS is on the same side as the United States in Syria, which this is amazing. But on the other hand, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just what frequently happens in these things. And so the Armenians are kind of caught in the crossfire here, and somebody might say, well, what's Hamas's position on the situation with Armenia and Azerbaijan? Well, Hamas was congratulating Azerbaijan, which is surprising. And we know that ISIS, and we know that the Azerbaijanis used, and we know they had these mercenaries, these jihadist mercenaries from Syria, also from Afghanistan. Some of these people were complaining they weren't getting properly paid. They were used as, I think back in the 2020 44-day terror war of aggression, they would send them in first as human wave assaults to figure out where the defenses, for Artsakh were.
Well, hold on a second. I'm still trying to process the first thing you said. You said that Hamas congratulated Azerbaijan in this recent accident in Artsakh.
Yeah, I see. Hamas was congratulating Azerbaijan on this, and this may have been from the 2020 war, but they definitely were saying they were on the side of Azerbaijan. Yep.
And what about? But you don't know of any particular Hamas statement on this recent action in Artsakh?
I'm not sure if this was the most recent or if it was from the earlier, but I know they have come out publicly.
And who's they? Their official leadership?
Yes.
Why would they congratulate them, knowing that Israel is their number one weapons supplier?
Well, that's an interesting
and knowing
question.
that Armenian Orthodox Christians share faith with many Palestinians and are experiencing the same thing of being removed.
Yeah.
Why would they do that, Hamas?
I
guess. Well, let me be fair. Hamas is an extremist, radical Islamic group, right? So they're probably not that sympathetic to Orthodox Christians, but so maybe that was just kind of a ridiculous thing to expect. But why, if they're sworn enemies of Israel, would they be supporting or congratulating Azerbaijan and their conflict with Armenia when Azerbaijan is getting most of its weaponry from Israel? Do they just not see that as enough of a connection to be, discordant with?
Well, that must be it. I'm not sure of any other reason, but again, I think they see, their thought of violent Islamic jihadism as being paramount. And as you had asked earlier about, how much of this situation is religiously oriented, even though it's not clear to me how much of a devout Muslim Aliyev is. There's no question that there's a lot of cultural genocide that goes on from the Azerbaijani government, destroying churches, converting them, misrepresenting the situation there, destroying the Armenian Kachkar cross stones that they have. They had in this area called Jolfa, which is across the way from Iran. That the Azerbaijanis destroyed all of that, and Nakhchivan and all the churches there. They have destroyed churches in Artsakh and in Nagorno-Karabakh and the Artsakh area. And so maybe they saw some affinity there, or maybe they just saw that Azerbaijan won, and they say, "Oh yeah, we'll cheer them because because they were the winners." And it may be that they thought, well, Turkey, Azerbaijan, sort of thing, all the same. But like I say, on this issue between Israel and Palestine, there's some difference between what the Turkish government is saying and what the Azerbaijani government is saying. They're not on the same page on this at the moment.
And to be fair, you said Iran congratulated Azerbaijan too with this, right? Or no?
Not the, but the one from 2020. They said, oh, they were just liberating Azerbaijani land, or one of their people came out and said that. And so you get different comments, because then you get other people saying, well, really, we think what happened there wasn't right, and we said it to the Armenians, but their government's been, I don't think their government has come out anything recently and saying we support the Armenians regarding Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh, but they have come out and said they didn't want to see any changes on the Armenian-Iranian border. The Iranian government was, I think, was very clear about that, and they warned Azerbaijan not to do that. And they said, if you do attack the Armenians here, at that point we will that they would strike back. And the position that they had, a few decades ago, might have been different as well. And they do actually in Iran, and this gets back to a point I think that you'll find interesting. In Iran, there are a significant number of Armenian Christians there, and churches and cathedrals and things, and they are protected. They have some in this area called Isfahan, or New Isfahan, where they have this one particular cathedral that's just a beautiful one. And so they've been much more protective of the, if you want to call it, the indigenous Armenians who live in Iran and are Orthodox or Apostolic Christians, much different than the situation with the Azerbaijanis, where they're horrific to these people. But in Iran, and you're not supposed to proselytize. If you try to go out and convert the Muslims to Christianity, that's a problem. But they also were respectful, and their government was protective of the Armenians and some of the other minorities there too, religiously, including, I've heard from people who were of the Jewish faith from Iran, is that actually they, if they thought there was a connection with the state of Israel, now that's a problem. Now they're not going to be protective or nice to you. But if it wasn't that they were actually fine with it, And there were other groups too. The one group that in Iran that they seemed to really hate was the Baha'i. I guess they thought the Baha'i were beyond the pale or something like that. But
what in the world did the Baha'i do to the Iranians?
I don't know. I just mentioned that one. That's the one that I heard that apparently is the thing. But anyway, so we talked about some of these things, and you know how it is with the geopolitics, David. A lot of times there's strange bedfellows. You go like, well, I thought these two groups were friends, and then they were both enemies with the other. But then it gets complicated as to how the leadership of these different groups will see what's best for them and or for their group. And so a lot of times there's changes in things that happen, which takes us back to something that George Washington said. And I believe, since we're talking about this and looking at the bigger picture of Central Asia, West Asia, and the Middle East and all that, what Washington's farewell address, I know you're very familiar with it, but he warned against these permanent entangling alliances. And he said, when you get these affections for some of these foreign causes, it's going to distort things here in this country. We'll have people that have different views of it. And here in Michigan, in Southeast Michigan, this is particularly prevalent, right? Because we have large populations that are very strongly involved in things in this part of the world. And so Washington said, if the United States then says, or politicians say, we want to stand with a certain country, like we're seeing people now trying to see, we all have to stand with the state of Israel. We have a lot of neighbors that would object to that and say, well, no, here's what's really been going on. And he said that the problem is that then we're going to create enmity amongst Americans, and we'll have situations where things will be done that will not be to the benefit of Americans in America, for the majority of Americans, but just for those that have a special interest in this one thing, and we'll even have Americans fighting each other. It will encourage factionalism, and it will have terrible consequences, and it will forfeit advantages that we have, not only that we have in the background of America, these great thinkers from the Anglo-Saxon tradition and the great men who through centuries developed the philosophies that were then enunciated in various documents leading up to and including the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation and later the Constitution and other things of that nature, as well as our geographic advantages. In Washington, he wasn't the only one, but he, in his farewell address, was very passionate about this and very articulate on it, said we just shouldn't do that. And yet you look around today, and we've got in the media and in the political world people just demanding that we do exactly that thing, which is harmful for America, contrary to what George Washington and other American revolutionary patriots said, and violates the rights of Americans living and yet to be living, born and unborn, as some people will say, because they might get to cash checks. This would include people who disagree with the policy of standing with any particular nation. This will include people who are too young to vote, and people who aren't even born yet might have to cash checks that are written by politicians for various reasons, for causes that didn't affect Americans until they got us involved. And of course, that's already happened in a number of cases.
So as an Armenian American, you don't want America's government to give aid or military training or support to Armenia.
I'm for Americans voluntarily helping
Right.
the Armenians, but I want the United States government to, and I think for the Armenians, I think it's a mistake for Pashinyan and others to say, you know, we can turn our backs on people in the region here, and then we'll have the United States, you know, and they can talk to the Europeans if they want, but I think you got to be able to get along in that neighborhood, and the United States government starts getting involved in this sort of thing. Boy, so often this blows up, you know, in ways that are negative.
What
for the people.
specifically is the United States doing to be involved in this? Besides, you said some weapons dealings.
Well, the subsidy with Azerbaijan would be the one thing.
What subsidy?
Well, by waiving Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act. So money is going to Azerbaijan, which they
How
then
much?
use.
Do we know?
Yeah, well, it tends to be in the area of about $100 million or more per year that goes to them, and then United States involvement, you know, indirectly by shipping weapons to other countries that might ship weapons to Azerbaijan. And we talked about the situation in Israel as an example of that.
And now, what is ethnic cleansing? The definition of ethnic cleansing, just to make sure we're precise about what's happening here.
Okay, well, one definition of ethnic cleansing would be driving people out from an area where they live and have lived, and just getting rid of that ethnicity. Another definition, another part of it, and some people say it's a euphemism for this, but if you see mass killing of people, or so not just driving them out, but eradicating people from areas, or just killing them based on their ethnicity, and then changing the population demographics because you killed them and they're dead, or it could be maybe the idea, well, maybe we can starve them out and get them to want to leave, you know, as they were trying to do, as Azerbaijan was trying to do. So the ethnic cleansing is multifaceted, and some say, well, it sometimes uses a euphemism for genocide. And I think there are people that are genocide scholars that would say, yeah, even if it's just driving people out, that is a form of genocide, and certainly can be a form of cultural genocide. But all too often what happens is not just driving people out of an area, which is horrible enough, but massive killing. And if we look at the history of, for instance, of Azerbaijan, even before it was a recognized state, in Baku, they had a very large Armenian population that's been completely wiped out. Some of it, in certain situations, there were massacres and people were slaughtered. In other cases, they fled. They had to flee, and they left virtually everything behind. But they got out. And there's a lady, Anna Estevasturian Turkat, who wrote a book, Eyewitness. She was a young girl in Baku when this happened around 1990 or so, 1990, 91. There had been other mass killing sprees in Baku. The same thing happened in other towns in what we would consider Azerbaijan. The same thing happened in Artsakh when the Azerbaijanis and the Turks were trying to take over with the Turkish, the army of the Islamic army of the Caucasus, and there were massacres in Shushi. I think more than once they went through and killed 20, 30,000 Armenians there. So that, that's ethnic cleansing, and it's also genocide and that sort of thing. And what Turkey did, and this would be separate from, previous to this, what Turkey did previous to this in the Turkish Empire, again, in that 1895 through 2023 period, against the Armenians, the Assyrians, and the Pontic Greeks.
Not 2023. You said 1923?
Yeah. I meant 1923. I misspoke. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 1895 through 1923. There was genocide and ethnic cleansing, genocide, mass killings, and it was horrific what they did, and ethnic cleansing you could also label it that, but also driving the people out. So there were deportations and forced marches and everything else that completely, and then to eradicate the traces of their existence there previously. So all that, I think, would fall under that. And then actually, now that we're talking about that, there were other instances even after 1923. I think it was in the early 40s. Uze Bulat has written about this. And there weren't that many Armenians left, but even with the Armenians, the Greeks, the Jews that were in Turkey, and the Assyrians, there was persecution of them in that early World War II period by the Turkish government. And then later, I think it was 1955, there were some terrible riots and destruction of properties. And again, it was an echo of what had happened in Turkey previously to these same people. And so you look at the area. We talk about what happened to the Armenians. I mean, look at the Greeks. I mean, the western part of Turkey along the Aegean, but also far inland. That's a historically Greek area, but the Greek presence has been essentially wiped out. And one of the famous incidences in the post World War I period after that war had ended, and unlike with Nazi Germany, Turkey was not brought completely to heel. In fact, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who participated in the later stages of these genocidal actions, led the Turkish army victoriously against the Allies and took the city was then called Smyrna. Now it's known as Izmir. And they roped off the Christian quarters, and the Armenians and the Greeks were forbidden to leave. Then they lit the place on fire, and they were burning the people to death. And it was horrible. Then folks were jumping into the water to swim. Even today, we see Turkish militants, Turkish gray wolves, extremists laugh about this and talk about, oh, we gave the Greeks and Armenians swimming lessons and they that sort of thing. And there were some ships that were in the harbor. The Allied navies were in the harbor and didn't do much to intervene. But there was a Japanese ship in particular where apparently they took on board a lot of these refugees and people that were escaping this horrible fate. And then, of course, what the Turkish apologists do is they say, oh, it was the fault of the Armenians and the Greeks. They did it, which is, of course, nonsense. But there's a lot of that going on, by the way. Another thing that people need to be aware of while Aliyev is preparing to launch further aggression against Armenia is they have a 24/7 Armenophobic line complex and propaganda complex. And they're hard at it every day. It seems like there's something coming out either on social media or they're being interviewed. People are seeing some other spokespeople spewing hatred and falsehoods on the BBC or Al Jazeera or something else. They have the Hikmet Hajiev. There's Nijar Aparadai, I think is how her name's pronounced, and they have a number of them that are very active in misleading everyone as to what's going on and trying to pave the way for the rationalization and justification of future crimes against humanity. So hopefully people around the world will be aware of that. Hopefully Americans will be aware of it. And in whatever policy ideas they think should be done, we'll take that into consideration and to understand that, John Quincy Adams said, we go not abroad in search of monsters to destroy, but the United States government has gone abroad in search of monsters to create, either directly or indirectly, and they've done that.
Man, we've been going abroad so long, making monsters. I don't think we've ever been home. There's no one home. It's just constant adventures into, some of the most disgusting, amoral, immoral, demonic, bat crazy bloodlust for war one could ever have conceived. That's what our government has become. It reminds me of those disgusting little, those little fungus creatures that can get inside of an ant, and the ant's dead, but they can still control the body of the ant parasitically, and they can move the little ant along with the fungus. And I think I think there's a wasp that can do that. There's one of those. I got to look it up. It's some kind of wasp that can like harvest. It can like remote control. I think there's a fungus too. But you see these horrible these like bugs that are like dead, but they're being moved. Like their guts are completely removed, but they're still moving based on some kind of control by a parasite. And that's what I think of the war industry. It's become this parasite that's taken over. Remember that movie from the 80s, the Ghostbusters movie where the Statue of Liberty gets possessed,
Right.
and it becomes this lumbering monster, and that's how it's sadly, that's how I think of the U.S. government, that it's been so hollowed out with any, touch point with reality by war interests and all that entails, that it's become like a zombie state that lumbers around the world on behalf of, what is in the best interest of war profiteers. And it's pretty horrifying to think about.
Well, it is, David. I think there's a phrase. I don't know if it might be from Carol Quigley or somebody, but revolution within the form. So the form outwardly say, right. Oh, we have all these, founding fathers, the Constitution, the flag, that.
Yeah.
But really things are much different, right? And this has been bad for Americans. It's been horrific for people overseas. I think the people in Israel are less safe because of it. And apparently Israel has very draconian gun control laws. So you go back to that and say, and this is something for all of us. The people need to be armed. And then something like this happens with, and of course, there's a lot of questions. Well, how did they get across the border like this? It looked like nobody was paying attention, and how Hamas came across with these awful terrorists from Hamas who are bloodthirsty maniacs and savages. If some of the Israeli people had been armed, maybe their self-defense might have slowed this down or dissuaded them, in some ways. And so the same in this country and in other places, but the American people, the Israeli people, the Arabic people, the Palestinian people, the Armenians, Iraqis, frankly, Turks and Azerbaijan, Russians and Ukrainians, I believe are all worse off for this. And it's been something that has completely changed our country. This parasite that has destroyed our liberty and is a threat to us all.
And it's funny too, because so much of this new emerging right in the American conservative politics rightly condemns the large influence of crony corporations in dictating policy, but at the same time, they keep demanding, more centralized government just in their image to somehow root out the evil of this cronyism. But it never seems to dawn on them that that's the ability, having a monopoly of government with that kind of lawless disregard for restraints is precisely what gives these crony corporations the power that they have. They cannot seem to conceive, and it's become very fashionable to say, "Oh, libertarianism is a stupid philosophy," as some kind of hand waving dismissal of this critique. But at the end of the day, I don't understand how else these war merchants and big pharma cartels and all the rest of it could possibly be able to have the kind of outsized control over so many people's lives around the globe without the monopoly of the use of force and centralized power that a bloated government provides these entities. So I don't understand how else they could have done this. You've got to have this cap. You have to have the apparatus of the initiation of violence that the state provides to be able to create so many top-down situations in which war merchants can just loot a country to the tune of trillions of dollars for every kind of conflict that never needed to be started up in the first place or exacerbated in the first place.
Well, that's a great Well, David, you nailed it right there. And of course, this is reminiscent of the great Robert Higgs and what he's pointed out, right? So it's the same thing, and how the state is the enabler of these things, and is the corporations are bad, but and of course the state is when it comes up with the idea of, oh yeah, limited liability through the corporate structure, but then it's the state itself that is the mechanism for the mass death and all these other things, and of course we're seeing now the surveillance state and the censorship industrial complex and the military industrial complex and the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and of course the banking and the financial, I guess you say, state complex. So the corporatism is running wild, and it's hurting everybody all over the world. And yet it takes a lot of courage for people to stand up against it, particularly if they want to be in the political realm, because frankly, I mean, you know what the blowback is if you point out some of these things. People become very upset, and they make unfounded accusations against those who will point it out. So that's a very sad thing. But it looks like if we're going to have, and you think back to what they talked about, the American Revolutionary Patriots, what they talked about, and look at what we have now. And you say, man, Thomas Jefferson's, and it wasn't just him, of course, there was that committee, and I think it included John Dickinson and Benjamin Franklin, but they had the long train of abuses. It's so much worse now. It's so much more global, and between what they're trying to fashion, put on top of everybody, both financially with the alleged central bank digital currencies, with alleged digital IDs, all these sorts of things, and the censorship, and what's already happening in Europe. They're saying with this, I think it's the DSA, Digital Services Agreement or something, where they're basically telling Elon Musk and everybody, if you come out with reports or information or thoughts that are contrary to the narrative of what the establishment wants, they just want to completely shut down. So it's and if we're blinded,
what's the wealth of GDP of Azerbaijan versus Armenia? Like what are they looking at financially in terms of their comparative wealth?
Well, Azerbaijan is significantly larger in terms of population, several times larger. So I think their GDP would be larger as well. Though it's interesting that you bring this up, because somebody was saying, well, this was a pro-Azerbaijani. They just thought that, hey, the Armenians should have a better life being part of Azerbaijan. And somebody else pointed out, well, no, actually, it turns out that the per capita income for the Armenian people is actually higher than it is in Azerbaijan, and it was better in Artsakh if the Azerbaijanis had just left them alone. And if you look at non-financial, and now they have the oil, though some people say that are saying, it looks like maybe the oil resources that Azerbaijan has, maybe those are going to be running out within a few years or something. But then if you look at it also from the standpoint of, and of course the people in Artsakh, they didn't want any part of it anyway. They didn't need them for that. But even that economic thing didn't make sense. But Aliyev's got a lot of money. You look at talk about a kleptocracy, the Aliyev family and their relatives and their friends, I guess, a very small group. They are phenomenally wealthy, and Aliyev and his wife and his daughters and his son, they have real estate all over the world. They are, they basically looted the country. Some of the Azerbaijani dissenters, Jalalazad is a name that comes to mind, and there are some others too. They'll point out that this is the oil and gas country, they say, and yet look how the people are living. That they barely get enough to eat. They show these people going around looking for food in garbage dumps or in trash dumpsters and that sort of thing, and so they don't have heat in the schools. The bathrooms don't work. It's just a horrible existence for those people over there. But they do have, and then their overall human rights standing is one of the very worst. It's like North Korea. Somebody said on social media, say, well, gee, as an insult to North Korea, it's so bad in Azerbaijan. I don't know if it's quite that bad, but it's very close. I mean, their score is extremely low. No press freedom. The people, the Azerbaijani people, are abused. They'll say, "Oh, well, let the Armenians. They should stay here. They can have all the rights as Azerbaijanis." The Azerbaijani people don't have any rights in that society, and that society is rife with 24/7 Armenophobic lies and hate mongering. So there's no way that any sane person would want to stay behind and be part of it. And we've seen how they're treated. We've seen the head choppers and the ear choppers and the mutilators and what they've done to the POWs and captives, including we talked about before, Anusha Petyan and the others. It's just You know, I
So
guess
why
maybe,
is it that the wine mobs at the State Department in Israel, why are they supporting Azerbaijan if they're head chopping and ear chopping and whatever else they're doing?
well, I guess those things don't matter as much as maybe something else. And so there's another agenda. What would it be? I think part of it is the anti-Iran agenda. Then we get to the idea that, well, you know, people say, well, Iran, you sometimes they have marches and people say bad things or whatever, but um, Iran has been under attack, as you know, for a long time, and the United States has participated in that. And even though the Iranians, right after 2001, remember there was that big rally they had in the square in Tehran, 1 million people, and they were sincere about sympathy for the American victims of what happened on 9/11. And they were said, hey, we'll help in any way we can. They actually went through the Swiss apparently and said, let the Americans know, hey, we don't like these people. There are our enemies too that did this. And you know, you may recall there was the blowing up of the some statues and things, I think in Afghanistan by the Taliban. And so the Iranians, these people are savages. They wanted to work with the United States on this. And they went through the Swiss, who then faxed something to Cheney or something. And then Cheney got really mad. And he said, no, I told the Swiss, don't you ever do that again. They wouldn't even talk to them about working together to fight against Al Qaeda.
Wow. It's insane. Absolutely insane. You know, the founders would be ashamed of what we're doing.
Yeah, I agree. And we should be ashamed, David, that
They don't
none
even
enough.
know, but Americans don't even know that Armenia or Azerbaijan exists. They don't know that. You know, the people who watch Sean Hannity and think that's a window into the world, they don't even know that those countries exist. I don't think, I think if you did a quiz, it'd probably be about like 10% of Nikki Haley voters would even conceive of the concept that Armenia and Azerbaijan are countries. You know what I mean? Like they don't even know. I mean, let's just be honest about it. We
Well,
have a deliberately dumbed down the American population, and it serves its interest.
right, right. Well, in fact, something that just happened recently, and it just comes to mind. You mentioned Sean Hannity. So Vivek, and I just mentioned this. So he came
Yeah,
to Michigan, and there was a Republican leadership conference. I was at this thing, and I got a chance to. He gave a good speech. I mean, as we say, if you listen to him, I'm going to say that you and I would probably agree with a lot of what he says. We find other things that, well, maybe we don't agree with this thing, but compared to most of these guys, he sounds pretty good anyway. And he's a very smart man. So I had a chance to chat with him just very briefly, made mention of the situation. And he knew about it. And I said, would you please speak out about it at this upcoming debate and mention that we need to enforce Section 907 and stop U.S. subsidization and U.S. military cooperation and support for Azerbaijan? He said he would. Now, I don't think that happened, but of course, that debate was a disaster, apparently. But on Tucker Carlson, he brought this up and he spoke about it eloquently. And he was speaking about it with Hannity. And he has said before, there's a big problem with the Azerbaijani lobby. Apparently, Hannity heard the word lobby and thought that Vivek was talking about the Israeli lobby, and Hannity went ballistic. And Vivek had talked about Nikki Haley and how her family has profited from the war criminals and the military-industrial complex and all that sort of thing, war profiteers. And Hannity went nuts. And I thought, well, this was kind of interesting. And Vivek's talked about this, and so people are going back and forth on it. So this is part of the problem, is that we have so much in the way of soundbite-ism and so much of, again, going back to Robert Higgs, truncating the antecedent and this whole idea that we don't need to worry about history and it's all knee-jerkism and obeying what we hear from the mass media driving people, from the politicians driving people, and doing it in ways you'd say are totally at variance with what the oath takers say they're going to do, totally at variance with what the American Revolutionary Patriots talked about, totally at variance with what's in the Bible, totally at variance with anything that would be pro-liberty or pro the common person in this country and living by the golden rule with people around the world in a just world. And yet there it is. But so Vivek, at least to some degree, I think he deserves some credit for bringing this up and not backing down to Hannity on this. And you mentioned Hannity and Nikki Haley, and that's exactly who I think we're coming up in this discussion that Vivek had with Hannity. So your observation about so many people being unaware of this, and I found that, and I bring this up, the people I've talked to, and this includes like Republicans here in Michigan, they're empathetic, they're sympathetic, and most of them say, well, we knew about like Armenian genocide from a long time ago, but we didn't know anything about this was going on. Yeah. They just don't know about it, and it gets pushed off the second page 2, I guess, or whatever, by some of these other incidents that come up, and everybody reacts very vociferously and sort of a knee-jerk reaction to somebody. And what Hamas was doing, there was, of course, was horrible, and it deserved the condemnation. But so many other things get lost. And then when we hear people talking about wiping out populations and saying, well, they're human animals and we're going to destroy them, and down to the, at some of these rallies, I say, well, maybe we ought to step back. And something that you've talked about, Dave, for a long time is get in touch with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and what he was talking about in the Bible, and following the Beatitudes and the Golden Rule and that sort of thing, and forgiveness, and love your neighbor, love your enemy. And that's really tough. You're talking about this situation. If you ask me, well, Dennis, do you love Ilham Aliyev? But no, I don't. And I will say, somebody says, well, as a Christian, you should be doing that. And I haven't gotten to that point yet. I guess I still got to work on that. But this is something, in fact, we just heard about this yesterday in church, actually. Quite interesting. Our minister was ordained, and we had a guest minister, and a guest minister was talking about this. I think this very topic. And as he was speaking, I said, now this is a guy that David Gornoski would find interesting, and vice versa. And he was talking about what was in the Bible about this, and about being able to forgive, and how gentleness is actually not weakness, but strength. It's restraint of strength, and knowing what
Right.
There's to everything there was a time, to everything there's a season, but having gentleness and forgiveness for ourselves and for others, and doing as Christ told us, why that's so critical and so important. So
what makes it hard for you to forgive that dictator? What's his name again?
Ilham Aliyev.
Okay.
Yeah, or Aliyev or whatever. And he was, even today, here he is. He's gloating, walking on the Artsakh flag, and and doing everything.
So it's just the humiliating acts one after another. It just makes it hard to have that's a stumbling block for forgiveness, right?
Right. So I guess I can say, when we're in prayer groups, I'll say, I pray for his heart to be changed.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. But it's his hatred for Armenians, for the diaspora. I mean, so it's interesting. They some other people say, oh, they won't even be done when they're friends with the Armenians. They're going to come to the diaspora. So I said, well, that's a threat to us over here in America. But I do know this, that with everything we've talked about with and people, again, I say the vast majority of Americans that I've met are good people. They're not evil. They just don't know, and they've been indoctrinated and socialized in some bad ways, and they react to that. But once they know better, and once they have the information, then I think it's a different thing. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people tend to have an open mind when they become aware of the reality outside of the TV party programming that they're inundated with. But that's the big thing, there's got to be an Armenian lobby. I mean, how come they don't have their videos trending on Twitter of the atrocities to the same degree that we're seeing these other horrific terrorist atrocities? That seems to be the way to get people's attention in this day and age.
Right. And I should mention that there's also an Armenian lobby. There are people. There's the Armenian National Committee of America, ANCA, ANCA. They do good work. There's the Armenian Assembly. There are others. And of course, there are a lot of Armenian groups that are raising money for humanitarian purposes. There's a huge humanitarian need. And I need to mention the Armenian Missionary Association of America, very highly regarded. They've proven through their deeds as well as their words that they can be trusted. And they're, if you go to amaa.org, there's a place where people can donate for that. And there are other groups through the American General Benevolent Union, the Society for Orphaned Armenian Relief, the Armenian Relief Corps. I mentioned the Anna Estefatarian Turktat. She's got a group that raises money. She does a lot of work raising money for newborns, for infants, and for mothers and that sort of thing. But the AMAA is one in particular that we work with at our church and that our family contributes to, and they do wonderful work at amaa.org. But all these groups are good. And yes, there is work. People are working on getting the word out about this. The Lemkin Institute works hard at that. Some of these groups I mentioned, like ANCA and the Armenian Assembly, will share videos and information. Also, the International Association of Genocide Scholars is doing this.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that are working sort of as a grassroots way. But it's interesting. The Armenian government, not so much. You say, well, why not? But the Azerbaijani government is very much into this. On the Armenian side, it's more grassroots, man of the people kind of.
Are the Armenians, are the Armenian governments or Armenians themselves guilty of any war crimes or terrorist actions?
The Azerbaijanis make a lot of claims about that. and there was there was a once there used to be a group a long time ago called, I think it was the Armenian Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia. And they did some things with some diplomats and that sort of thing, where you can say, well, that probably was a terrorist act. So that, so probably. I'm sorry.
When was that?
Oh, this goes back decades. The group's not been around for a very long. And then the Azerbaijanis will try to make some assertions, and there were some things that are disputed. Like there was a town, an area called Khojaly, and they'll say, "Oh, this was Armenian terrorism." And then you look at it, and a number of people are very knowledgeable about it. Say, "Well, actually, no." Even some Azerbaijanis at that time said, "No, it wasn't the Armenians." And there was a lady named Dana Meslov, I think is her name, and she was working with Chingiz Mustafayev, who was an Azeri photojournalist, a video journalist, who went there, and they said, well, the people that were killed there were killed before the Armenians were there. So they weren't killed by Armenians, they were killed by somebody else. And it looks like they were either this former president of Azerbaijan, Mutalibov, said actually what happened was there were Azerbaijani special forces who killed these people. I guess they shot them in the knees, and they scalped them or something, and they left them there. Well, the idea was they were apparently Meshkedian Turks. So they said, well, they really aren't us. And then we can blame it on the government and overthrow the government. You see, and make it more militant. That was the allegation. A lot of people have written about this and looked at it and said, they said the Armenian soldiers didn't get there. But with all this fighting going back and forth, I'm not going to say, oh, there was never anything that happened where there was not any action taken by some Armenian forces that somebody might look back, well, maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. So I can't say that never happened, but I will say this: the genocidal instinct to wipe out the population and to commit ethnic cleansing and to eradicate everything about them, that is from Turkey and Azerbaijan. Armenia and the Armenians are trying to survive and have their country, and I think it's at great risk now. And whatever was done, say 30 or 40 years ago, you look at that and say, well, the people living today aren't responsible. The children today aren't responsible for that. And so when you hear these stories of this one mother that said, and I know people are debating about beheading stories and that sort of thing, but there was in the Israel-Palestine thing and other areas, but this woman said she found her children and they had been beheaded, young children. You say, well, who thinks of this sort of thing? And these guys were showing with these videos, they had their serrated knives are coming across, and I'm saying,
you're talking about this is Armenians that did this, or Azerbaijanis?
These were Azerbaijanis during the Azerbaijani aggression, the most recent one. And we see this happening all the time. We see how people are treated in Azerbaijan, including Azerbaijani protesters. Not saying that the Pashinyan government's great on this, but it's definitely worse than Azerbaijan. They have they've eliminated the Armenian population in all areas under Azerbaijani control, and it was done with the most gruesome of methods. And they are talking about finishing the job, as is Erdogan.
Wow.
That I think is something that any person of decency would say cannot be allowed to happen, and we have to prevent it.
Is it more of an ethnic hatred or a religious hatred, or all mixed in equally blended, or what? What's going on?
I would say ethnic, but with the religious part is definitely part of it too. And they're looking at establishing this neo-Ottoman caliphate, and so again, the Turks and the Azeris, or the Tartars, actually, as they were known previously, the Tartars, they came from Mongolia. They came around from the south and from the north or whatever, but they weren't the native or the autochthonous people of that region. And but over a very long period of time, and through centuries of wars and ethnic cleansings and massacres and all that, and then getting control, and then with the 1895 through 1923 genocide that we talked about, and then subsequent things, they've reduced the Armenian population to the point, and the area of land that is under Armenian control now, to where they say that this thing which divides Turkey and Azerbaijan, this one country, these people that have survived, that maintain their independence, maintain their Christianity, maintain their culture, if they could wipe them out, then they could say from the Dardanelles all the way up to into Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and that sort of thing, they could have this Turkic empire. And Erdogan, I think, has dreams of ruling it. So does Aliyev. So they accomplished it. I don't know would that cause a conflict for them once they accomplished their goal. But I think that's what they're about. I do think there is the religious enmity towards the Christians. You think about it, what happened back in the first Artsakh War is there was actually a reclamation of Christian lands for Christians, which is very unusual, right?
Right.
And it was a victory for the Armenians against their tormentors and their killers and their murderers from Turkey and Azerbaijan, and that offended the pride of Ilham Aliyev and others of his ilk. And Erdogan talks about the leftovers of the sword, that they will finish what their grandfathers started. And I believe that's what they're aiming to do. And so I say the United States should not be subsidizing this, and all people of goodwill should be doing what they can to let the world know what's going on and to do what they can to stop it. And I would like to do it in a way that doesn't violate the rights of my fellow Americans, unlike people that pursue the interventionist foreign policy. But I think it is an emergency situation, and so I'm not sure what the answer is to stop this. I hope that the Armenian government and the Armenian people are doing everything they can to prepare to defend themselves against this impending disaster, impending attack.
So 120,000 Armenians have already been moved out of Artsakh. Is that right?
Right. And so there are several million that live in Armenia itself, and they're added to that. And there's great humanitarian need. And if somebody says, well, I don't know about all this other stuff, but I would like to help these people that need housing and food and medical attention and donate to that. As I say, the AMAA is a great organization for that.
So Artsakh is now under Azerbaijan control completely.
Yes. And the Armenian population is virtually gone. And they've been there as the majority in that area for millennia. Thousands of years.
Then it's this very sobering information you share, and we will continue to pray for peace in the region and for sobriety of mind for folks who are in America that want to speak out or have a clear conscience about, what's going on over there and our participation in it through our government. So I thank you for sharing it as always. And where can people follow your feed on Twitter to stay up to date with what's going on?
Right. So I'm at Dennis Marburg with Marburge, and then the number 1 on Twitter. And then if you follow me, there'll be a lot of other people that have a lot of information on this that I repost, and people can follow them as well. Like my friend Len at Origins Discovery, and I mentioned Lindsay Snell and Uze Bulett. And there's so many Art from my friend Art from North Carolina, and Bedros and George. Anyway, you'll see them. They're all there. And I would say to people too, listen to David's programs, because he really provides a lot of good information on so many important topics, and including philosophical and spiritual and theological, as well as the political and food and health and all that sort of thing. So David, thank you for all your wonderful work you have with your many guests.
Well, thank you. And we'll continue to follow this story and hope and pray that, America can stop supporting what's going on in here. For folks who want to stay in touch with us at A Neighbor's Choice, email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.